The blood on her hands had dried hours ago, but Katherine Nichols could still feel its weight as she rode through the pre-dawn darkness of Oregon Territory. Her stolen mares, hooves thundering against the hard, packed earth, while the June morning of 1872 crept toward the horizon behind her. She had killed a man tonight, the man who had promised to love her until death, and now death had come for him instead, delivered by her own trembling fingers wrapped around cold steel, and she knew with absolute certainty that his brothers would follow her across every mile of wilderness between Montana and wherever she might run. The landscape shifted as dawn broke over the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that Katherine could not appreciate through her exhaustion and terror. Her dark hair, once pinned elegantly for a dinner party that felt like it belonged to another lifetime, now hung in tangled waves down her back, catching on the rough fabric of the dress she had fled in. At 23 years old, she had imagined her life would look vastly different from this desperate flight through unfamiliar country. But circumstances had a way of destroying even the most careful plans. Oregon City emerged from the morning mist like something from a fever dream, all rough timber buildings and muddy streets carved into the hillside above Willamette Falls. Katherine could hear the roar of the water even from a distance, a constant thunder that seemed to match the pounding of her heart. She had chosen this destination almost randomly, remembering only that her mother had once mentioned a distant cousin who had headed west to seek fortune in the Oregon wilderness. Whether that cousin still lived here, or had moved on, or had perished in any of the 1,000 ways the frontier claimed its victims, Katherine had no way of knowing. She guided her exhausted horse down Main Street as the town began to wake, aware of the curious stares that followed her progress. A woman alone, riding astride like a man, her fine dress torn and stained with travel, made for quite a spectacle. Katherine felt each gaze like a physical touch, wondering if any of these strangers could see the guilt written across her features, if they somehow knew what she had done. The livery stable sat at the far end of town, a sturdy structure that smelled of hay and horse and honest labor. Katherine dismounted on legs that nearly buckled beneath her, catching herself against the mare's flank as black spots danced across her vision. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, had not slept in over 30 hours, and her body was beginning to rebel against the punishment she had inflicted upon it. "Need help there, miss?" The voice came from inside the stable, deep and concerned, and Katherine looked up to find a man emerging from the shadows. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard physical work. His face was sun-bronzed and handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore simple clothes, work-worn denim and a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms, and there was something immediately trustworthy about his bearing that made Katherine want to weep with relief. "I need to board my horse," she managed, her voice cracking from disuse and thirst. "And I need to find somewhere to stay." The man moved closer, his expression shifting from concern to alarm as he took in her appearance more fully. "Madam, are you hurt? Should I fetch the doctor?" "No," Katherine said quickly, too quickly, and she saw understanding dawn in his gray eyes. He thought she was running from something. He was right, of course, but she could not let him know the full truth. "I just need rest and a safe place. Please." He studied her for a long moment, and Katherine felt as though he could see straight through to her soul, reading all her secrets in the morning light. Then he nodded, reaching out to take the mare's reins from her trembling hands. "Name is Zachary Dawson," he said quietly. "I run this stable, and I have a room above it that is not much, but it is clean and it is safe. You are welcome to it for as long as you need." Katherine felt tears prick at her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since pulling the trigger. "I do not have much money." "Did not ask for any," Zachary replied, already leading the horse toward the stable entrance. "Come on now before you fall over. When was the last time you ate?" She could not remember, so she said nothing, simply followed him into the dim coolness of the stable. It was well maintained, she noticed even through her exhaustion, with clean stalls and fresh hay and the kind of orderliness that spoke of a man who took pride in his work. Several horses nickered softly as they passed, and Zachary murmured greetings to each of them like they were old friends. The room above the stable was reached by an exterior staircase, and Katherine had to grip the railing tightly to make the climb. Zachary opened the door with one hand, still holding her horse with the other, and gestured for her to enter. It was indeed small, just a single room with a narrow bed, a washstand, a chair, and a small wood stove. But it was immaculately clean, and the window looked out over the hills beyond town, and Katherine felt something in her chest loosen slightly at the sight of it. "I will bring you some food," Zachary said from the doorway. "There is water in the pitcher for washing and clean blankets in the chest. Try to rest, miss." "Nichols," Katherine supplied, then immediately wondered if she should have given a false name. But it was too late now, and she was too tired to maintain an elaborate deception. "Katherine Nichols, Miss Nichols," Zachary repeated, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both respectful and comforting. "You are safe here, I promise you that." Those words, spoken with such quiet certainty, nearly undid her completely. Katherine managed to hold herself together until he had closed the door behind him, until she heard his footsteps descending the stairs. And then she collapsed onto the bed and let the tears finally come, silent and hot, and full of fear and grief and desperate hope. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, someone was knocking softly at the door. Katherine jolted upright, her heart racing, reaching instinctively for a weapon she did not have. But then Zachary's voice came through the wood, gentle and unhurried. "Got some breakfast for you, Miss Nichols. May I come in?" Katherine stood, smoothing her ruined dress uselessly, and opened the door. Zachary stood there with a tray bearing a plate of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread, along with a steaming cup of coffee. The smell made her stomach clench painfully with hunger. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the tray with hands that shook only slightly. "You are too kind." "Just being decent," Zachary said, but there was something in his eyes as he looked at her, something that made Katherine's breath catch. It was not pity exactly, nor was it curiosity. It was more like recognition, as though he understood what it meant to be running from something. "I will let you eat and rest. But Miss Nichols, if you are in trouble, if someone is looking for you, I need to know. This town may be small, but strangers get noticed, and I would rather be prepared." Katherine set the tray down on the chair, her appetite suddenly warring with her need for secrecy. But there was something about Zachary Dawson that made her want to trust him, that made her feel like perhaps she did not have to carry this burden entirely alone. "There may be men coming," she said finally, staring at the floorboards. "3 brothers from Montana. They will be looking for me, and they will be very angry when they find me." "Why?" Zachary asked, his voice still gentle but with an edge of steel beneath it. Katherine looked up, meeting his gray eyes directly. "Because I killed the 4th brother. Because he was my husband, and he tried to kill me first, and I shot him to save my own life." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with confession and consequence. Katherine watched Zachary's face, waiting for the horror or judgment or disgust that she was certain would appear. But instead, he simply nodded, as though she had told him something sad but not surprising. "Then we will keep you safe," he said quietly. "I promise you that, Miss Nichols. They will not touch you while I draw breath." It was a bold promise, perhaps even a foolish one, given that he knew nothing about her beyond what she had just told him. But Katherine found herself believing him anyway, found herself clinging to those words like a lifeline in a storm-tossed sea. Over the following days, a strange routine developed. Katherine remained largely in the room above the stable, venturing out only in the early morning or late evening when fewer people were around to see her. Zachary brought her meals 3 times a day, refusing to accept any payment despite her repeated attempts to give him what little money she had left. They spoke during these visits, tentative conversations that gradually grew longer and more substantial. She learned that Zachary was 28, that he had come to Oregon 5 years ago from Kansas, that he had been running from his own past, though he did not elaborate on what that past contained. He had built his business from nothing, earning the trust and respect of the town through honest dealing and hard work. He never married, never had time for courting, spent his days tending horses and his evenings reading by lamplight. Katherine told him about growing up in Boston, about her family who had been respectable but not wealthy, about the charming stranger who had swept her off her feet with promises of adventure out west. She did not tell him everything about her marriage, could not bring herself to describe the gradual transformation of charm into cruelty, of love into terror. But Zachary seemed to understand anyway, his jaw tightening whenever she fell silent mid-sentence, his eyes dark with anger at things she did not say. A week passed, then 2. Katherine began to relax slightly, began to hope that perhaps the brothers had not followed her, that perhaps they had buried their dead and moved on with their lives. She took to helping around the stable in the mornings before the town fully woke, mucking out stalls and grooming horses, grateful for physical labor that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. It was during one of these early morning sessions that Zachary found her in the stall with his own horse, a massive bay gelding named Thunder. She was brushing the animal's coat in long, smooth strokes, murmuring to him softly, and she did not hear Zachary approach until he spoke. "He likes you." Katherine turned, startled, and found Zachary leaning against the stall door with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that made her heart skip strangely. It was warm, that expression, and appreciative, and something more that she could not quite name. "He is a good horse," she said, returning her attention to Thunder because it felt safer than looking at Zachary just then. "Strong and gentle at the same time." "Like his owner," Zachary suggested, and there was a hint of humor in his voice that made Katherine smile despite herself. "I would not presume to judge," she said lightly, moving around to Thunder's other side. "But you have been very kind to me, and I am grateful." "Katherine," Zachary said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice made something flutter in her chest. "You know you cannot hide up here forever." She did know, had been thinking about it more and more as the days passed. Eventually, she would need to find proper work, to establish herself in the community, to build some kind of life for herself. But the thought of stepping fully into public view terrified her, made her imagine eyes on every corner watching and waiting. "I know," she admitted quietly, "but I am afraid." Zachary entered the stall, moving to stand beside her. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather and hay that seemed to cling to him. When she dared to glance up at his face, she found him looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "I meant what I said that first morning," he told her. "I will keep you safe, not just from whoever might come looking, but while you find your feet here, while you figure out what comes next. You do not have to face any of this alone." Katherine felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen solid since the night she fled Montana. It felt like hope or trust, or perhaps the beginning of something even more dangerous. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over Zachary's where it rested on Thunder's flank. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing all this for me? You do not know me, do not owe me anything." Zachary turned his hand over beneath hers, his calloused fingers curling around her smaller ones. The touch sent warmth racing up her arm, and Katherine could not bring herself to pull away. "Maybe because I know what it is like to need help and not have anywhere to turn," he said slowly. "Or maybe because from the moment I saw you, exhausted and terrified and still trying so hard to be strong, I felt something I have not felt in a long time. Maybe because when I look at you, Katherine, I see someone worth protecting, worth knowing, worth—" He trailed off, shaking his head slightly. "Sorry, that is probably too much, too soon." "No," Katherine said quickly, stepping closer without conscious decision. "No, it is not too much. I feel it too, whatever this is. I know it is complicated and probably foolish, and I am still legally married even if my husband is dead, and I have so much baggage that I should not even consider." Zachary stopped her rambling by reaching up with his free hand to gently cup her cheek. His palm was warm against her skin, his touch impossibly tender for such a large, strong man. "We do not have to figure it all out right now," he said quietly. "We can just take it one day at a time, see where things go. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other." "Is that all right?" Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice. She had not expected this, had not imagined that she could feel attraction or affection or the stirrings of something deeper so soon after everything that had happened. But Zachary was nothing like her husband had been. Where one had been charming but ultimately cruel, the other was quiet but genuinely kind. Where one had used pretty words to manipulate, the other spoke plainly and meant what he said. The difference was as stark as night and day, and Katherine found herself leaning into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. They stood like that for a long moment, the stable quiet around them, except for the soft sounds of the horses and the distant roar of the falls. Then Zachary slowly, carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away, leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead in a kiss so chaste and sweet that Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Come on," he said, stepping back and offering her his hand. "Let me show you the rest of the town properly. It is Sunday, so most folks will be at church. We can walk around without too much attention." Katherine took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, and let him lead her out into the morning sunshine. Oregon City was beautiful in the summer light. All green hills and rushing water and buildings that spoke of frontier determination. Zachary walked her through the streets, pointing out the general store and the doctor's office, and the small schoolhouse where the teacher lived alone and might need help. He suggested, if Katherine was interested in working with children. They climbed the hillside above town, until they reached a spot where they could see for miles in every direction. The Willamette River winding silver through the valley below, the mountains rising purple in the distance. It was breathtaking, and Katherine felt some of the tightness in her chest ease as she took it all in. "This is why I stayed," Zachary said, standing beside her with his hands in his pockets. "When I first came here, I thought I would just pass through, maybe winter here and move on come spring. But I stood right here on this spot and looked out at all this, and I thought, this is a place where a man could build something. A place where the past does not matter as much as what you do with your future." "It is beautiful," Katherine agreed, and she was not just talking about the view. She glanced at Zachary, at his strong profile and the way the wind ruffled his dark hair, and felt that dangerous flutter in her chest again. "Thank you for bringing me here. There is more I want to show you," Zachary said, turning to face her. "There is a canyon to the south where wildflowers grow thick as carpet in spring, and a swimming hole in the creek that stays cool even in August, and a ridge where you can watch the stars come out and feel like you are the only person in the world. I want to show you all of it, Katherine. I want to watch you fall in love with this place the way I have. I want—" He stopped, shaking his head with a rueful smile. "Listen to me getting ahead of myself again." "I like it when you get ahead of yourself," Katherine said softly. "It makes me feel like maybe I have a future worth getting ahead to." They walked back to town slowly, taking the long way, and by the time they returned to the stable, Katherine felt lighter than she had in months. Zachary made her lunch, and they ate together in his small quarters attached to the stable, talking about everything and nothing. He made her laugh with stories about difficult horses and eccentric customers, and she found herself sharing memories from her childhood that she had not thought about in years. It was late afternoon when the sound of hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Multiple horses, riding hard, coming fast up Main Street. Zachary's expression changed instantly, all the warmth draining from his face to be replaced by cold alertness. "Go upstairs," he said quietly, standing and moving to the door. "Lock it behind you and stay away from the window." Katherine felt ice flood her veins. "Zachary, now, Katherine." She ran, her heart hammering, taking the stairs 2 at a time and slamming the door behind her. She threw the bolt and then pressed herself against the wall beside the window, angling carefully to peer out without being seen. 3 men on horseback were dismounting in front of the stable. They were hard-looking, weathered and dangerous, with guns on their hips and anger in their bearing. Even from a distance, Katherine recognized them. The Morrison brothers, her husband's family. They had found her. She watched as Zachary stepped out to meet them, his stance relaxed but ready, his hand resting casually near his own gun. She could not hear what was said, but she saw the eldest brother, Jackson, do most of the talking. He was gesturing angrily, clearly describing someone, and Katherine had no doubt that the someone was her. Zachary shook his head, his expression neutral, and said something that made Jackson's face darken with fury. The second brother, Thomas, moved toward the stable entrance, but Zachary stepped smoothly into his path, blocking him. There was a tense moment where Katherine was certain violence would erupt, her hand pressed to her mouth to keep from crying out. But then the third brother, the youngest one named Cole, said something that made the others pause. He pointed back toward the center of town, then up at the hills, seeming to argue for something. Jackson looked torn, then finally nodded grudgingly. All 3 mounted up again, but before they rode off, Jackson turned back to Zachary and said something else, something that made Zachary's jaw tighten. Katherine waited until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely before unbolting the door. Zachary was already climbing the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, and he swept into the room with barely controlled energy. "They are staying at the hotel," he said without preamble. "They described you perfectly, asked if I had seen you. I told them no. They did not entirely believe me, but they cannot search the place without cause, and the sheriff here is a friend of mine. That gives us a little time." "Time for what?" Katherine asked, her voice shaking. "They will not leave until they find me." "And when they do, they will not find you," Zachary said firmly, crossing to her and taking her by the shoulders. "Listen to me, Katherine. We have options. We can go to the sheriff, tell him everything, try to get the law on your side. Or—" he hesitated, his gray eyes searching hers. "Or I can take you away from here. There are places deeper in the territory, settlements so small they barely have names, where we could disappear." "We," Katherine echoed. Zachary, this is your home, your business. I cannot ask you to give that up for me. You are not asking, he said simply. I am offering. Because the thought of those men getting their hands on you makes me want to tear something apart. Because in these past few weeks, you have become important to me in a way I cannot fully explain. Because I made you a promise, Katherine, and I intend to keep it. Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. This is insane. You barely know me. I know enough, Zachary said, his thumbs brushing gently over her shoulders. I know you are brave and kind. I know you have been hurt, but you have not let it make you bitter. I know that when you smile, really smile, it lights up your whole face. I know that I want to keep seeing that smile, want to be the one who puts it there. He paused, his expression intensely serious. And I know that I am falling in love with you, which is probably the most insane part of all this. But there it is. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Katherine stared up at him, at this man who had known her for only a few weeks, but was willing to upend his entire life to keep her safe. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. I am falling in love with you too, she whispered, and saying it aloud made it real, made it powerful. I did not think I could feel this way again, did not think I deserved to, but you make me want to hope, Zachary. You make me want to believe in good things. Zachary made a rough sound low in his throat and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Katherine wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face to his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent, letting herself feel safe for just a moment. We will figure this out, he murmured into her hair. Together, I promise. They spent that evening planning. Zachary had a friend with a ranch about 30 miles east, deep in the foothills where strangers would be noticed immediately. They could go there, he suggested, wait until the Morrison brothers gave up and moved on. Or Katherine could go to the sheriff, and Zachary would back up her story, testify that she had arrived frightened and hurt, that clearly she had been defending herself. In the end, they decided to try the law first. If Oregon justice would not protect her, then they would run, but at least they would have tried. The decision made, they settled in to wait for morning when Zachary would go speak to Sheriff Watkins. But fate had other plans. Sometime after midnight, Katherine woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright in bed, her heart racing, and ran to the window. Orange flames were licking up the side of the stable below, spreading quickly across the dry timber. "Zachary!" she screamed, not caring who heard. She threw open the door and flew down the stairs, her bare feet slapping against wood. Smoke was already thick in the stable proper, and she could hear the horses screaming in terror. Zachary emerged from his quarters, pulling his pants on as he ran. He took in the situation with a single glance, then shouted at Katherine. "Get the horses out. I will find water." Katherine did not hesitate, plunging into the smoke-filled stable. Her eyes streamed and her lungs burned, but she made her way to the first stall and threw it open, slapping the mare inside on the rump to drive her toward the door. The animal needed no encouragement, bolting for safety. Katherine moved to the next stall and the next, working mechanically through the fear and the smoke. She had freed 4 horses when a beam overhead cracked ominously. Katherine looked up just in time to see it giving way, splintering and falling directly toward her. She tried to move, but her nightgown caught on something, holding her fast. Then Zachary was there, slamming into her and driving them both sideways. The beam crashed down inches from where they had been standing, sending up a shower of sparks. Zachary rolled off her, grabbed her hand, and hauled her to her feet. "Out!" he yelled, pushing her toward the door. Now, they stumbled into the night air, coughing and choking. Other people were emerging from buildings now, drawn by the fire and the noise. Someone had formed a bucket brigade from the creek, but Katherine could see it was too late. The stable was fully engulfed, flames reaching high into the darkness. She turned to Zachary, intending to make sure he was all right, and froze. Standing at the edge of the crowd, illuminated by the firelight, were the Morrison brothers. Jackson was watching the blaze with satisfaction, and when his eyes met Katherine's across the distance, he smiled coldly. "You," Katherine breathed, rage overwhelming fear. She started toward them, but Zachary caught her arm. "Katherine, no, that is what they want." "They burned your stable," she cried, tears streaming down her face from more than just smoke. "They destroyed everything you built." "They destroyed a building," Zachary said, his voice rough but steady. "Buildings can be rebuilt. You are alive. The horses are alive. That is what matters." Sheriff Watkins appeared then, a portly man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He took in the scene quickly, his gaze lingering on Katherine in her nightgown and Zachary's protective stance beside her, then swinging to the Morrison brothers. "Anyone know how this fire started?" he called out. "Lightning, maybe," Jackson Morrison suggested with false innocence. "Awful lot of sparks in the air tonight. In June," the sheriff said dryly. "With no storm." He walked closer to the brothers, his hand resting on his gun belt. "You boys are new in town. Want to tell me what brings you to Oregon City? Family business," Thomas spoke up. "Looking for someone who does not want to be found." "That's so." Sheriff Watkins glanced back at Katherine. "Miss, do you know these men?" Katherine stepped forward, lifting her chin despite her fear. "Yes, Sheriff, they are my husband's brothers, my late husband's brothers. He died 3 weeks ago in Montana, and they blame me for his death." A murmur ran through the crowd that had gathered. The sheriff's expression sharpened. "And did you have something to do with his death, miss?" "I shot him," Katherine said clearly, her voice not wavering. "He was drunk and angry, and he came at me with a knife, and I shot him to save my own life. I was his wife for 8 months, and I have the scars to prove what kind of man he was." The crowd's murmur grew louder, and Katherine saw several women nodding sympathetically. This was the frontier, where violence was not uncommon, and most people understood that sometimes survival required harsh measures. Jackson Morrison's face flushed dark red. "She murdered my brother in cold blood, Sheriff. We want her arrested and brought back to Montana to face justice." "Montana jurisdiction ends at the Montana border," Sheriff Watkins said calmly. "And from where I am standing, I see a frightened woman who fled across hundreds of miles to escape something, and I see 3 angry men who just happened to be nearby when a fire conveniently started. Now, I am not saying anyone here is guilty of arson, but I am saying that you boys should probably move along. Oregon is not friendly to those who cause trouble." "This is not over," Cole Morrison said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made Katherine shiver. He was the youngest, not much older than she was, and his eyes held a deep, abiding grief that she recognized. He had loved his brother, loved the man Katherine had known before the violence, and he could not let that go. "Yes, it is," Zachary said, moving to stand beside Katherine. He was covered in soot and ash, his chest bare except for the suspenders holding up his pants, and there was something almost frightening in his expression. "You have your vengeance, if that is what burning my stable was about. You have cost me my business, my home, nearly my life. That should be enough blood for anyone. Now get out of our town before the sheriff finds a reason to lock you up." The 3 brothers stared at him, then at Katherine, then back at the burning building. Something passed between them, some wordless communication, and then Jackson spat on the ground and turned to his horse. "This is not over," he repeated, echoing his younger brother. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but blood calls for blood, and you will answer for what you did." They mounted up and rode off into the darkness, and Katherine felt her legs give out. Zachary caught her before she could fall, lifting her easily into his arms. She buried her face against his shoulder, shaking with reaction. "Get her inside somewhere warm," the sheriff instructed. "And Zachary, come see me in the morning. We will figure out what to do about this mess." Someone, a kind older woman Katherine vaguely recognized from her walks around town, offered her home for the night. Zachary carried Katherine there, laying her gently on a soft bed while the woman fussed and brought blankets and hot tea. But Katherine would not let go of his hand, would not release her grip on him. "Stay," she whispered. "Please stay." "Always," Zachary promised, settling beside her on the bed, still holding her hand. "I am not going anywhere, Katherine. I promise you that." She finally slept, exhausted and overwhelmed, and woke to find pale morning light filtering through unfamiliar curtains. Zachary was still there, sitting in a chair beside the bed, watching over her. His eyes were shadowed with fatigue, but he smiled when he saw her wake. "Morning," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" Katherine took inventory. Her throat hurt from smoke, her lungs ached, and her heart felt like it had been put through a wringer. But she was alive, and Zachary was here, and somehow that made everything bearable. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "This is all my fault. If I had never come here, if you had never helped me, then I would still be a man going through the motions," Zachary interrupted gently. "Working and sleeping and existing, but not really living. Katherine, these past few weeks with you have been the most alive I have felt in years. So do not apologize for that. Do not apologize for any of it." She sat up, wincing at various aches and pains. "What are we going to do now?" "Now," Zachary stood, stretching his back with a grimace. "Now we go talk to the sheriff, figure out what our options are. And then we decide what comes next together." The conversation with Sheriff Watkins was surprisingly productive. He had already sent a telegram to Montana, inquiring about the circumstances of her husband's death. If there was any record of violence or complaints against the man, he explained, it would support Katherine's claim of self-defense. In the meantime, he was posting a deputy to watch for the Morrison brothers' return, and he suggested that Katherine might want to consult with a lawyer about her legal standing. The town, it turned out, had rallied around them. By noon, a collection had been started to help Zachary rebuild the stable. Several men showed up with lumber and tools, ready to begin construction immediately. Women brought food and offers of shelter, and the general store owner extended unlimited credit until Zachary could get back on his feet. "This is what community means," Sheriff Watkins said with satisfaction. "Looking out for your own." Katherine was moved to tears by the generosity. She threw herself into helping however she could, organizing the food donations and keeping track of offers and supplies. It felt good to be useful, to be part of something larger than her own fear and grief. Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged. Zachary and Katherine stayed in a boarding house while the stable was rebuilt, and they spent their days working side by side on the construction. She learned how to swing a hammer and hold a nail straight, and he teased her gently when she inevitably hit her thumb. They took meals with the other workers, trading stories and laughter, and slowly Katherine began to feel like she truly belonged. The law moved slowly, as law always did. But eventually word came back from Montana. There had indeed been complaints filed against Katherine's husband by previous wives, women who had fled before Katherine arrived, women who had tried to speak up and been silenced. The pattern of violence was clear and documented, and the local marshal in Montana agreed that Katherine had acted in self-defense. There would be no charges, no extradition, no legal consequences for what she had done. The news should have brought relief, but Katherine found herself strangely numb when she heard it. She had been carrying the guilt and fear for so long that she did not quite know what to do without their weight. "It is over," Zachary said quietly that evening. They were sitting on the hill above town, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "You are free, Katherine, truly free." "I do not feel free," she admitted. "I keep waiting for something terrible to happen, for them to come back, for it all to fall apart." Zachary turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "That is what trauma does. It makes you expect the worst even when the danger has passed. But you survived, Katherine. You fought for your life and you won, and now you get to decide what comes next. No one else, just you." "What do you want to come next?" she asked, searching his face. "For us, I mean." They had been dancing around this question for weeks, growing closer every day but never quite defining what they were to each other. It felt like the right time to ask. Here in the golden light with the world spread out below them, Zachary's expression was incredibly tender. "I want everything," he said simply. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, here in Oregon or wherever you want to go. I want to marry you if you will have me and spend the rest of my days making you happy. I want it all, Katherine, but only if you want it too." Katherine felt her breath catch. It had been less than 3 months since she fled Montana, barely any time at all by most measures. But trauma and intensity had a way of compressing time, of making connections deeper and faster than normal life allowed. And the truth was, she could not imagine her future without Zachary in it. "I want it too," she whispered. "All of it. With you." Zachary's smile was brighter than the sunset. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was sweet and gentle and full of promise. Katherine melted into it, her hands coming up to cup his face, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt truly safe. They married in late August, when the new stable was finished and the summer heat was just beginning to fade. It was a simple ceremony at the small church in town, with Sheriff Watkins standing up as witness and half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a dress that the women of Oregon City had sewn together for her, simple calico in a soft blue that matched her eyes. Zachary wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and so full of love that Katherine's heart ached with the beauty of it. "I will keep you safe," he promised as they exchanged vows, repeating the words he had spoken that first morning. "I will honor you and cherish you and stand beside you through whatever comes. This I swear." "I will trust you," Katherine promised in return, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I will build a life with you and face the future without fear. This I swear." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed her thoroughly enough to make the crowd whoop and cheer, and Katherine laughed against his mouth, feeling light and free and impossibly happy. The reception was held in the newly rebuilt stable, with tables set up in the main area and lanterns hung from the rafters. There was food and music and dancing, and Katherine whirled in Zachary's arms until she was dizzy with joy. This was nothing like her first wedding, which had been a rushed affair in a Montana mining camp with strangers looking on. This felt real and right, and like the beginning of something beautiful. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift away, Zachary led Katherine up to the room above the stable that had been transformed into a proper living quarters. There was a real bed now, and curtains on the windows, and personal touches that made it feel like home. But Katherine barely noticed the surroundings. Her attention was entirely on her husband, on this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "Are you nervous?" Zachary asked gently, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, giving her space. Katherine considered the question. She should be nervous, given her previous experience with marriage. But this was different, everything was different, and she found that what she felt was not fear but anticipation. "No," she said, moving closer to him. "I am not nervous. I trust you, Zachary, completely." His expression softened with love and relief. He reached for her slowly, drawing her into his arms, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her want to weep. They took their time, learning each other in the lamplight, and when Zachary finally lowered her to the bed and made her his wife in truth, it was with such care and devotion that Katherine understood what intimacy was supposed to be. This was not taking, but sharing. This was not violence, but gentleness. This was love. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Katherine's head on Zachary's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She felt reborn, as though she had shed an old skin and emerged as someone new. The woman who had fled Montana in terror seemed like a distant memory. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had survived and found love on the other side of trauma. "I love you," she murmured, tracing patterns on his skin. "I do not think I have said that enough." "You can say it as often as you like," Zachary replied, his hand stroking through her hair. "I will never get tired of hearing it." They drifted to sleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Katherine's dreams were peaceful for the first time in months. The weeks turned to months, and autumn painted the Oregon landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Katherine and Zachary fell into the rhythm of married life with surprising ease. She took a position helping at the schoolhouse 3 days a week, teaching the younger children their letters while the main teacher handled the older students. Zachary's stable business thrived, bolstered by the community's goodwill and his own tireless work ethic. They were happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way that Katherine had never imagined possible. But she should have known that peace never lasted forever. It was a crisp October morning when the Morrison brothers returned. Katherine was at the schoolhouse, helping a 6-year-old with his alphabet, when she heard the commotion outside. Horses, voices raised in anger, and then a scream that made her blood run cold. She ran to the window and felt her heart stop. Jackson, Thomas, and Cole Morrison were in the street, and they had Zachary. He was on his knees in the mud, blood running from a cut on his forehead, his hands tied behind his back. Jackson had a gun pointed at his head. "We know you are in there, Katherine," Jackson shouted. "Come out now, or your husband dies." The schoolteacher, a stern woman named Mrs. Peters, grabbed Katherine's arm. "You cannot go out there. Send one of the children for the sheriff." But Katherine was already moving, her decision made in an instant. She would not let Zachary die for her, would not let him pay the price for her choices. She burst through the schoolhouse door and ran into the street, her skirts kicking up mud. "I am here," she cried. "Let him go. This is between you and me." Jackson smiled coldly, but he did not lower the gun. "Is it, though? Because I think your husband here made it his business when he helped you escape justice. I think he is as guilty as you are." Katherine stopped a few feet away, her hands raised in supplication. "Please. He had nothing to do with what happened in Montana. I was the one who shot your brother. I was the one who ran. Zachary only gave me shelter. If you want revenge, take it from me, not him." "Oh, I plan to," Jackson said. "But first I want you to feel what we felt. I want you to watch someone you love die knowing you could have prevented it." "No." Katherine screamed, but Jackson's finger was already tightening on the trigger. The gunshot split the air, but it did not come from Jackson's weapon. The Morrison brother jerked and fell, a red stain blooming on his shoulder. Behind him, Sheriff Watkins stood with his gun drawn, and he was not alone. Half a dozen armed men from the town flanked him, and they all had their weapons trained on the remaining brothers. "Drop your guns," the sheriff ordered, his voice like iron. "Now." Thomas and Cole exchanged glances, then slowly lowered their weapons. Cole dismounted and went to his eldest brother, pressing his hand to the wound in Jackson's shoulder while shooting the sheriff a look of pure hatred. Katherine ran to Zachary, dropping to her knees beside him and frantically working at the ropes binding his wrists. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I am fine," Zachary assured her, though his voice was shaky. "Katherine, you should not have come out. They might have killed you." "And they were going to kill you," Katherine shot back, finally freeing his hands. She threw her arms around his neck, holding him tightly. "I could not let that happen. I would not." Sheriff Watkins and his men were rounding up the Morrison brothers, clapping them in irons. Jackson was cursing steadily, his face twisted with pain and rage. Thomas looked resigned, but Cole kept his eyes fixed on Katherine, and what she saw there made her stand and approach him despite Zachary's protest. "I am sorry," she said quietly, stopping a few feet away. "I am sorry for what I took from you. Your brother was not always a bad man. There was a time at the beginning when he was kind. I think that was the real him, the one you knew. But something broke in him and he became someone else, someone dangerous. I did what I had to do to survive. But I am sorry you lost him. I am sorry for your pain." Cole stared at her for a long moment, and Katherine saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Grief and anger and confusion all tangled together. Finally, he looked away. "He loved you," Cole said roughly. "In his own way, he did. He used to talk about you in the beginning, about how you were going to be different, how you were going to make him a better man. I do not know what happened, why it went wrong, but I believe you when you say you had no choice." He paused, then added, "That does not mean I forgive you. But maybe someday I can stop hating you." It was more than Katherine had hoped for. She nodded, accepting his words, and stepped back to let the sheriff take them away. As the Morrison brothers were led toward the jail, she felt a chapter of her life finally closing. They would face justice now, real justice, for assault and kidnapping and attempted murder. They would spend years in prison, and by the time they were released, the need for vengeance might have faded, or it might not. But Katherine could not live her life waiting for the other shoe to drop. She had to choose to move forward, to build her future with Zachary, to embrace the happiness she had found. That evening, sitting together in their room above the stable, Katherine and Zachary talked about what came next. About the danger that might always linger at the edges of their lives, about the choices they had made and the consequences they would live with. But mostly, they talked about the future they wanted to build together. "I want a family," Katherine said quietly, her head resting on Zachary's shoulder. "Children, if we are blessed with them. I want to fill this place with life and laughter. I want to replace all the dark memories with bright ones." "Then that is what we will do," Zachary promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We will build a life so full of love that the past fades into nothing. We will be happy, Katherine. I promise you that." And they were. Over the years that followed, they kept that promise to each other. The stable grew and prospered, becoming known throughout the territory for Zachary's skill with difficult horses. Katherine continued teaching, becoming beloved by generations of Oregon City children. They built a proper house on the hill above town, the one where they used to watch the sunsets, with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. Their first child was born in the summer of 1874, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. They named him Thomas, not after the Morrison brother, but after Zachary's father, a good man who had died when Zachary was young. The birth was difficult, and there were moments when Katherine was certain she would not survive, but Zachary held her hand through all of it, and eventually she held their son in her arms and knew that every moment of pain had been worth it. 2 more children followed in the years after, another boy and then a girl. until their home rang with the sounds of childish laughter and running feet. Katherine had never imagined she could be this happy, that life could be this full and rich and beautiful. Sometimes she thought about the woman she had been, fleeing through the darkness on a stolen horse, and it felt like remembering a stranger. The Morrison brothers faded into memory. Jackson died in prison 5 years into his sentence, an infection from his gunshot wound that finally claimed him. Thomas was released after 10 years and disappeared into the vastness of the West, never to be heard from again. But Cole eventually came back to Oregon City, no longer angry or vengeful but simply weary. He found Katherine in the schoolhouse one afternoon, 15 years after that terrible confrontation in the street. "I wanted you to know I finally understand," he said without preamble. "I have seen enough of the world now, seen enough bad men and good women caught in their wake. I understand why you did what you did. And I wanted to say I am sorry for all of it. Sorry for my part in terrorizing you. Sorry for not seeing my brother for what he had become. Just sorry." Katherine, now a woman in her late 30s with gray threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling, looked at this man who had once represented her worst fears. He was older too, his face weathered by time and experience, and she could see the peace he had finally found. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means more than you know." Cole nodded, turned to leave, then paused at the door. "He would be glad you are happy," he said. "The man my brother was before everything went wrong, he would be glad you found someone good." It was a strange thing to say, but Katherine thought she understood. There had been a moment long ago when her first husband had been capable of love. That man, the one who had existed before alcohol and violence twisted him, would have wanted better for her. It did not absolve him of what he had become, but it offered a kind of closure Katherine had not known she needed. She told Zachary about the encounter that evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained through all the years of their marriage. He listened quietly, his hand finding hers, and when she finished, he simply said, "Good. You deserved that peace." Life continued its steady forward march. Their children grew up strong and healthy, carrying with them the lessons of kindness and resilience that their parents had lived. The stable passed to their eldest son when Zachary's joints grew too stiff for the hard physical labor, though he still came down every morning to visit his beloved horses. Katherine retired from teaching but remained active in the community, organizing church socials and helping new families settle in Oregon City. They grew old together, Zachary and Katherine, their love deepening with each passing year until it was as much a part of them as breathing. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Katherine stood and raised a glass. 30 years ago," she said, her voice still strong despite her age, "I ran from my past at dawn, terrified and alone, and I met a man who promised to keep me safe. He kept that promise, but he gave me so much more. He gave me a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a future I never dared to imagine. Zachary Dawson, you are the best man I have ever known, and I thank God every day that I stumbled into your stable all those years ago." Zachary stood to join her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "And Katherine Dawson, you gave me purpose when I had none, hope when I had lost it, and a reason to believe in second chances. You are the bravest person I know, and loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life." They kissed to the applause and cheering of their family, and Katherine marveled at how far she had come from that terrified woman fleeing through the darkness. She had found not just safety, but joy, not just survival, but a life overflowing with love. Years later, when Katherine was 71 and Zachary 76, They took one final ride up to their favorite spot on the hill above town. It was harder now, with old bones and tired muscles, but they made it, settling on the same outcropping where Zachary had first brought her all those decades ago. "Still beautiful," Katherine murmured, looking out over the valley. "Always has been," Zachary agreed, but he was looking at her, not the view. Katherine smiled, leaning against his shoulder the way she had done 1,000 times before. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I asked why you were helping me?" "I remember every word I have ever said to you," Zachary replied, "but remind me anyway. You said maybe when you looked at me, you saw someone worth protecting, worth knowing, worth something more." Katherine turned to face him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "You made me believe I was worth those things, Zachary. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Zachary corrected gently. "I was just existing before you, Katherine. You taught me how to live." They sat together as the sun set in a blaze of color, painting the sky in the same brilliant hues it had shown them for 30 years of sunsets. And when they finally made their way back down the hill, moving slowly but steadily, hand in hand, they did so knowing they had built something rare and precious. A love that had not just survived trauma and danger, but had flourished because of the strength they had found in each other. Katherine Dawson lived to be 83 years old, surrounded by the family and community she had built in Oregon City. Zachary followed her just 6 months later, unable or unwilling to exist in a world without her light in it. They were buried side by side on that hill they had loved, overlooking the valley where they had made their life together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell the story for generations to come, about the woman who ran from her past at dawn and the cowboy who promised to keep her safe. About how that promise became a love story that endured through decades, about how they chose each other every single day, about how they proved that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest endings. And in Oregon City, where their memory was honored and their contributions remembered, people would sometimes claim to see two figures on the hill at sunset, standing together and looking out over the valley they had called home. Just shadows, perhaps, or tricks of the light. But those who believed in love that transcended even death liked to think it was Zachary and Katherine, still keeping watch over the town that had given them sanctuary, still finding beauty in the view, still standing together as they always had. The story of their love became legend, passed down through the years as an example of redemption and second chances, of courage in the face of fear, and of the transformative power of finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and chooses to love you anyway. It was a reminder that no matter how dark the night, dawn eventually comes, and with it the possibility of everything changing for the better. In the end, that was Katherine and Zachary's true legacy, far more important than the stable they built or the children they raised or the years they lived. They proved that love, real love, could heal even the deepest wounds. They showed that safety was not just about physical protection, but about creating a space where someone could be vulnerable and broken and still be valued. They demonstrated that the best kind of promise was not just spoken once, but kept every single day through actions and choices and unwavering commitment. And so the story ended not with violence or tragedy, but with peace and fulfillment, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Katherine had run from her past that dawned so long ago, and Zachary had kept his promise to keep her safe. But more than that, they had built a future together that neither could have imagined alone, a future filled with love and laughter and the kind of happiness that made all the struggles worthwhile. That, in the end, was the true Wild West love story, not one of gunfights and showdowns, but of two damaged souls finding each other in the wilderness and choosing, every single day, to build something beautiful together. It was a story of hope triumphant, of love enduring, and of promises kept across a lifetime. And it was a story that would never truly end, as long as there were people who believed in the possibility of second chances and the power of love to transform even the most desperate situations into something extraordinary.